Hi, what I'm going to go over is Era 7, West and Industrialization Study Guide. So this is just going to be the first part. It'll actually take me a little bit to go over each of the questions and to kind of explain. But this is for North Carolina, American History 2, the Essential Standards. So the first question on your study guide is, why do the Mormons actually move out west? And remember, the Mormons actually start in the eastern part of the nation. And pretty much everything in the East is very established. This is how things have been done. This is how things are going to keep going. And so when Joseph Smith, the founder of the Mormon faith, or Jesus Christ of the Latter-day Saints, has a new revelation and creates the Book of Mormons, some of his beliefs are not very well accepted by the East, so they move. And then what ends up happening to Joseph Smith is he is killed, and so his follower, Brigham Young, decides to go ahead and leave even that part of the West to come out all the way west to the Utah area. So they're actually going to travel along the Oregon Trail, and they get to the Great Salt Lake area, and they're going to go ahead and establish the Salt Lake area. So the Mormons move out west to escape religious persecution. People are pursuing them, persecution, for their religious beliefs. Question 2 is, what did the Transcontinental Railroad do economically for the West? So the East and the Western lines finally meet, and here's the picture of Promontory Point, and they meet in Promontory Point, Utah. The railroad really settles the West, because when the railroad comes in, so does civilization. Banks come, towns come, everything comes along the lines of the railroad. So it helped by bringing their agricultural products to the markets in the East. So now you're out in the West and you're farming. You can make all the stuff you want. You can have your cattle, your sheep, but the railroad is what's going to get it to the markets, to the buyers in the eastern part, and everywhere really in the United States. It brings goods out to the West too. Remember, when they come out west, they're bringing everything that they have and everything they ever want with them, until civilization comes along. And so as the train comes, so does all like the little stores and the goods that you would buy. So economically, the West needs the railroad. Now, the railroad's not going to be necessarily nice all the time, but that's one of those problems that farmers are going to have to deal with. Question 3 is, how did the railroad hurt the average farmer? And so what typically the railroad does is, because they know you're at their mercy, it is the only way for you to get your cattle, your sheep, and your product, your farm stuff, to the actual market. You're at their mercy, so they can charge you whatever they want. So they overcharge them to cover their losses that they make, because sometimes what happens is the railroad might have a bad business deal, they don't make as much money, and so you kind of cover your losses. They also have a tendency to give money back to rich people. So when Rockefeller and Carnegie are using the railroads to transport their industrial goods, the railroad is giving them a kickback. They're going to give them their money back, or at least some of their money back. Instead of charging them $1 million, they might just charge them $500,000. Well, it really, they're not going to lose money because the railroad's in the business to make money. So what they decide to do is pass that debt on to the farmers. So they overcharge them. They also do the same thing with the rebates. They'll give Rockefeller and Carnegie rebates where they get their money back on the actual train fare. And again, they're going to charge the farmer to cover those costs. They also do it with government officials on a regular basis. If you're a senator, you get the ride on the trains for free, because as long as you're riding on the trains for free, you're going to vote the way the railroad company wants you to vote. And if they want you to vote down anything that's about regulating the railroad, you're going to do it if you want to keep riding on the train for free. So rebates are just money back, but it's only going to be allowed to people who are rich and people who are in places to help the railroad industry. And basically, the railroads have a complete monopoly on any transportation of goods in and out of the West. They're not going to do cattle drives from Texas all the way to New York City. So you actually need the trains to help you out. And this is Cornelius Vanderbilt's son, and he is actually straddling the railroad lines. And so you really do see the modern day Colossus If you actually want to get into New York and certain places, you have to go through certain railroad companies, and or else your goods aren't going to get there. So question 4 is, what are some of the problems farmers are actually facing on the Great Plains? Lots of problems. They're from the East, or they're immigrants, and it's just a little bit different. There's really no water out west, and they can go years without rain, or at least substantial rain. So you have to dig a well. So you better go ahead. The first thing you do when you move out west, dig a well. And the well they're going to dig, they're going to use a windmill, which is going to act as a water pump to bring that underground water to the surface. The railroads are screwing them over every chance they can, because they're giving the rebates and the money back to all those rich people, the people who are in positions to help them out, certainly not poor people. There's no trees out west, so they don't have any trees, any lumber that make actual homes. So they make these soddies, and here's what a sod home looks like. It's from all this prairie grass and mud and some, the dirt, the water that makes the mud, and they just kind of pack it, and they kind of make this sod house, a soddie. Also, another thing that really plagues them is that, yes, the government is giving them 160 acres of land, and yes, they are giving it to them for free. For first 5 years, you don't pay taxes on it, then you pay taxes on it. But 160 acres of land is not necessarily a whole lot. It's maybe enough for you and your family. But if you're trying to be a big farmer or a profitable farmer, 160 acres of land is very little amount. It's not enough to actually get out of poverty or to get out of lower middle class, okay? Question 5 is, how did the steel plow, refrigerated cars, and windmills help the farmers? It basically helps them by allowing them to be independent farmers. When you have a steel plow, you can cut through the tough prairie grass out west. The windmill is going to allow you to have water, so you don't have to rely on anything else. You have your own source of water thanks to the underground wells. You have a steel plow, and then the refrigerated cars. So you can actually have cold items like your pigs that you now have butchered. Sorry, guys. And now you have bacon. And so you'll be able to get that out to the east or the west or anywhere. So now your meat products and anything that you would like to stay cold can stay cold in these refrigerated train cars. It also hurts them as well, because every single time this new stuff comes out or things go wrong, they normally go in debt trying to buy it so that they can continue the farm. So when you are a poor farmer, you're coming out west because of the Homestead Act, you don't have a whole lot of money in the first place, and then you're going to probably put your house, your land up as collateral in order to be able to get the equipment to build a windmill or to get a steel plow or a mechanical reaper or any of those items. Then when you actually do start killing your cows or your pigs or whatever it is that you're farming, you now are going to have to pay a good large fee to use those refrigerated cars, because they're not free. The trains do not let the farmers, they don't let the farmers get the stuff on there for free. They're going to charge you. Question 6 is, what are some of the successes of the Grange movement? So the Grange is just a group of farmers. There is a farmer alliance. They're getting tired, really, really tired of the train and the train abuses. They feel like they can't win, so they get together and they try and get government regulation of the railroads. And it does actually work. The government actually does decide to regulate the trains. They do it with Wabash versus Illinois. Now, originally they did it with Munn versus Illinois, and Munn's the case where it's like they over-regulated. It was too much. So Munn, too much, too much regulation, and the railroads are being run out of business. And Wabash versus Illinois, they kind of flush it out. They wash out. You can't make the railroad company operate at zero profit. They actually have to have a profit base coming in so they can pay their employees so that they can keep the trains up and running. So in Wabash versus Illinois, it has to be a reasonable profit. So the government steps in on the side of farmers to help them out. They do it again with the Interstate Commerce Commission. So again, this is really kind of the biggest thing that the Grange gets is the Interstate Commerce Act. And what this does is says any train that crosses a state line, like it goes from North Carolina to Virginia, because it crossed state line, the federal government regulates it. And this is an understanding of our Constitution. Anything that deals with interstate trade, the U.S. government regulates it. Anything that deals with foreign trade, the U.S. government deals with it. It's in the Constitution read like that, okay? So when the ICC is created, it's a regulatory agency. The government is regulating the railroads, and this time they're regulating it for the little guy, for the farmers. It's really significant because they haven't done this before. Railroads are owned by individuals. They're private companies. So you have your Vanderbilt or one of these railroad companies. You've been operating however you want, and now the government's saying that's not going to happen. We are now going to actually watch and regulate you. You're going to have certain business practices, certain profit levels, but you can't do anything you want like you have been doing. So anytime the government regulates a private business, it's kind of a big deal. And most everything is a private business. Remember, you got like Amtrak, that's owned by the government, and the United States Postal Service. But most of our businesses in our country are privately owned. And when the government is regulating it, means that they are very active in the economy. They're no longer laissez-faire. So number 7, what was the Interstate Commerce Act and why is it significant? I pretty much just went over it on the other slide, but it is a regulatory agency and it controls trade within the U.S. Anything that is being traded, the U.S. is going to control it. And over time, they're going to expand the Interstate Commerce Act. It's very significant because it's the first time the government actually regulates a personally owned business. Railroads are personally owned by people like Vanderbilt and other guys, Gould, and there'll be a bunch of other ones. But they're actually saying what you can and can't do with your business, and that's a big deal back then. Not a big deal today because here are all the regulatory agencies that the U.S. government has today. Today, the government regulates a lot of things. Like and you'll be happy too when we look at the progressives, that our food and drugs are actually regulated. I want to know when I'm eating, ground beef, that it's really ground beef and not ground other things in there. And we'll look at it when we look at The Jungle by Upton Sinclair. And I suggest you don't eat before we read a passage of that. Question 8 is, what were some of the beliefs of the Populist Party? Basically, in 1896, you kind of see the major success of the Populist Party. They've got a candidate. They're running, William Jennings Bryan. He is not just a Populist Party candidate, which is an independent or third party. He is also a Democrat candidate. Okay, and because he's a Democrat, and during this time, Democrats are typically Southerners, and Southerners are typically farmers. The Populists were our Western people, and they're typically farmers as well. You're going to see a lot of things that farmers want. Farmers would like to see the government owning the railroads, because if the government owns the railroads, it's easier for them to regulate them. They also would like to see an 8-hour workday, so you are going to have factory workers who are also members of the Populist Party, because it's the People's Party. So an 8-hour workday would be nice, because some of them are working 12 hours a day or longer in the factories. They'd also like to see a graduated income tax. The income tax back then was based on how much land you owned. So farmers were paying more in taxes than your big business. Big business didn't own as much land because it doesn't take as much land to have a factory on. Whereas farming, it takes thousands of acres. Okay? And they also would like to call for bimetallism, silver and gold standards. So they would like to see free silver, okay, or a mix, silver and gold, so that they would be able to pay off their debts. This is what they would like to see, and that's their Omaha platform. There's more to it, but that's kind of the big key parts.